May 8, 1945, victory in Europe. For the soldiers in Times Square, the war was over. The Nazis were beaten. The world was safe. But for General George S. Patton, sitting in his command trailer deep inside Germany, the war wasn't over. In his mind, the real war, the war for the future of Western civilization, was just beginning. While the rest of the world was popping champagne and hugging Russian soldiers, Patton was writing a letter to his wife, Beatrice. He didn't write about peace, he wrote about the Mongolian savages he saw across the river. He wrote about a Red Army that was sweeping across Europe like a plague, looting, raping, and destroying everything in its path. He had a plan, a secret, terrifying plan that he whispered to his staff officers. He wanted to rearm the 2 German panzer divisions he had just captured. He wanted to keep his Third Army moving east. He wanted to drive the Soviets back to Moscow before they could build an Iron Curtain. But before he could launch World War III, he had to attend a dinner party. It was supposed to be a celebration of Allied unity. It turned into one of the most dangerous diplomatic incidents of the 20th century. When a Soviet general offered a toast to their eternal friendship, Patton didn't just refuse to drink. He delivered an insult so brutal, so specific, and so dangerous that it made the room freeze. This is the full, untold story of George Patton's private war against the Soviet Union and the toast that signaled the beginning of the Cold War. To understand the rage boiling inside George Patton that night, we have to rewind to the final months of the war. Patton was a racehorse. He lived for speed. By April 1945, his Third Army was tearing through Germany. The German Wehrmacht was collapsing. The road to Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich, was wide open. Patton could smell the prize. He told General Eisenhower, "I can be in Berlin in 48 hours. Give me the gas and I'll hand you Hitler on a platter." But then the order came down from SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, halt. Patton was stunned. He was told to stop at the Elbe River. He was told that due to a political agreement made at the Yalta Conference by Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, the city of Berlin was reserved for the Russians. Patton was furious. He screamed at General Bradley, "History will scream that we are fools." He knew what this meant. It meant that the Soviet Union would capture the German capital. It meant Stalin would control the narrative. And more importantly, it meant the people of Eastern Europe were being handed over to a communist dictatorship. As Patton waited on the banks of the Elbe, he watched the Red Army arrive, and what he saw horrified him. The American army was a machine of logistics, trucks, chocolate bars, organized supply lines. The Soviet army that Patton saw was something medieval. Patton wrote in his diary, "They are a scurvy race and simply filth. They are not soldiers, they are a mob." He watched as Soviet troops looted German homes, stealing watches, bicycles, and toilets they didn't know how to plumb. He heard the reports of mass sexual violence against German women, which was strictly censored in the U.S. press at the time, but was an open secret on the front lines. To a man like Patton, who came from a wealthy, aristocratic Virginia family and believed in the chivalry of war, the Soviets weren't just a different army, they were an alien species. He didn't see them as liberators, he saw them as the new Huns. This was the mindset of the man who was ordered by Eisenhower to attend a victory lunch to celebrate their partnership. The date was May 14, 1945. The location was a requisitioned palace near Linz, Austria. It was the first major social meeting between the American High Command and the Soviet High Command. On one side, you had General Omar Bradley and General Patton. On the other, the legendary Marshal Ivan Konev. The atmosphere was tense. The Americans arrived in polished jeeps. The Russians arrived in a convoy of looted Mercedes-Benzes. The banquet hall was filled with the smell of stale tobacco and heavy perfume. The tables groaned under the weight of caviar, smoked fish, and endless bottles of vodka.
Patton sat down. He was seated directly across from the Soviet generals. He noticed immediately that the Russian officers were already drunk. They were loud, they were boisterous. Patton sat in silence. He refused to smile. He touched his food but barely ate. Then the toasting began. In Russian culture, the toast is a sacred ritual. You don't just drink, you make a speech, and you don't sip, you drain the glass. Marshal Konev stood up. He spoke for 10 minutes about the glory of Stalin and the genius of the Red Army. The translator worked furiously. When Konev finished, everyone drank. Patton took a polite sip of water. Then an American general stood up and toasted to the United Nations. Everyone drank. Patton checked his watch. He wanted to leave, but the drama was just starting. A Russian general, a man with a chest full of medals flushed with vodka, stood up. He looked directly at Patton. The Russians knew who Patton was. They respected him as a tank master, but they also knew that he hated them. The Russian general raised his glass high. He proposed a toast to the future where the Soviet Union and the United States would dominate the world together. But then he added a sting. He implied that the Soviet Union had done the heavy lifting, while the Americans had enjoyed a late entry into the war. The room went quiet. General Bradley looked at his plate. Patton slowly stood up. He didn't pick up his glass. He turned to the interpreter, a young American major named Major Skorus. "Major," Patton said. His voice was high-pitched as it was when he was angry, but it was deadly calm. "Tell that Russian general that I will not drink with him." Major Skorus turned pale. "General," he whispered, "I cannot say that. It will cause an international incident." Patton leaned in closer. "You tell him," Patton hissed. "Tell him that I regard him and every other Russian officer in this room as a son of a bitch." Imagine the scene. The war had ended days ago. The world was balancing on a knife's edge, and the most famous American general had just called the Soviet High Command a table of sons of bitches. Major Skorus had no choice. Trembling, he turned to the Soviet general and translated the insult. "General Patton says he will not drink because he believes you are all sons of bitches." The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The Russian general blinked. He looked at Patton. Patton stood there, chin up, defiant, waiting for a fight. Then the Russian general threw his head back and roared with laughter. He slammed his hand on the table. He shouted back in Russian. The translator turned to Patton, relieved. "General," he said, "the Russian general says that he considers you to be a son of a bitch as well, and for that reason he will drink with you." Patton's stony face cracked. A small, dry smile appeared. "All right," Patton said, "one son of a bitch to another." He picked up a glass of vodka, not water this time, and downed it in one gulp. The crisis was averted. The room erupted in laughter, but while the other generals laughed, Patton didn't. He knew that this moment of levity was a lie. As Patton left the banquet, he reportedly turned to General Bradley and said, "Brad, we're fools. We should fight them now while we're here. In 5 years, these people will have the atomic bomb. They will have the whole of Europe." Bradley dismissed him. "George, you're trying to start a war because you're bored." But Patton wasn't the only one thinking this. Unknown to Patton, in London, Churchill had ordered his own generals to draw up a plan. It was codenamed Operation Unthinkable. The plan called for a surprise attack by American, British, and rearmed German forces against the Soviet Union on July 1, 1945. It was the exact same plan Patton was advocating for. But the politicians in Washington had no stomach for it. The American public wanted their boys home. They didn't want another war, so Patton was silenced. The son of a bitch toast was rude, it was undiplomatic, it was dangerous. But looking back through the lens of history, we have to ask the uncomfortable question, was the old cavalryman right? He saw the Soviet Union not as a partner, but as a predator, and while the politicians toasted to eternal friendship, Patton was the only one at the table sober enough to see the enemy sitting across from him. What do you think? If the Allies had listened to Patton and pushed the Soviets back in 1945, would the world be a better place today, or would it have led to a nuclear catastrophe? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.